We're delighted to welcome you all to the Royal Irish Academy for tonight's discourse, Explaining Unionism. I'm Dr. Mary Kelly. I'm the Treasurer of the Academy. I'm standing in for the President here this evening, who would usually open the discourse. He's unavailable tonight. Academy discourses are the oldest and most renowned series of talks in Ireland. The first discourses were presented in 1786. Historically, they were the occasion reserved for the most distinguished academics to publish and first reveal and discuss their work in public. Things have changed now. Academics usually have different ways of publishing their work. However, the tradition of discourses at the Academy has continued. And we very often find that at these discourses, and especially at the in-conversation ones such as this, that you get a great insight into the work that people are doing. So I do hope that you will do that tonight, and that you'll participate in the questions and answers later on as well to make a good discourse of it. We record these discourses nowadays, and they're all available on the Academy's website to listen back or look at again. I would like to acknowledge the additional significance of tonight's discourse, as on this day 239 years ago, in 1785, the Academy met for the first time at Lord Charlemont's house on Parnell Square, in the building that now houses the Hugh Lane Gallery of Modern Art. Charlemont was the first president of the Academy, and indeed there's a portrait of him on the stairs outside. Before we begin the actual discourse proper, I just have some short Academy business to undertake. The minutes of our last discourse, The Geometry of Chaos, From Climate Change to Foundations of Quantum Physics, which was held on the 7th of February 2024, were posted online. Since our members did not inform us of any issues with these minutes, these will be taken as approved, and the President will sign the minute book to that effect. So now I would like to welcome our esteemed speakers for this evening's discourse. So first of all, Linda Irvine, MBE, is a language rights activist from East Belfast. She's a speaker and supporter of the Irish language and is the founder and project leader of the Turris Irish Language Project, which aims to connect people from Protestant communities to their own history with the Irish language. Philip Orr, MRIA, is an independent scholar, playwright and public intellectual who brings the fruits of research into the public sphere to advance peace and reconciliation in Northern Ireland. He was admitted as a member of the Royal Irish Academy in 2018. Glenn Patterson is an award-winning novelist and screenwriter living in Belfast. He's a founding member of Fighting Words Northern Ireland and is the director of the Seamus Heaney Centre at Queen's University Belfast. Our panel chair for this evening is Tommy Gorman, formerly the RTE News Northern editor from 2001 to 2021. His autobiography, Never Better, My Life in Our Times, was published in 2022. Now to the discourse. I'm just going to hand over to Tommy, who's going to run things from here on. Tommy, you have about an hour for the discussion, and then we'll have about 20 minutes after that for audience participation, questions, and discussion from the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you for coming in such numbers. I hope we're going to have a very lively session. I feel very privileged to be here in your company this evening. The panel discussion is to explore the different meanings of unionism and how they can be explained to societies outside Northern Ireland. How is Ulster Unionism defined? And is it misunderstood in this republic? Some very interesting questions. We were talking upstairs about, is there such a thing as a typical unionist? And I think that's almost an impossible question to answer, or an easy question to answer. I'm going to start with you, Linda, and how would you describe yourself? Do you consider yourself you're a unionist, or what is your understanding of unionism? What would you like to share with us in terms of how you see unionism?
Okay. Well, I always feel uncomfortable when I'm asked to talk about anything connected with unionism, because I'm not sure that I define myself as a unionist. I don't think I've ever defined myself as a unionist, because unfortunately I think unionism and the label unionist has had a lot of negativity surrounding it that I don't want to be particularly connected with. I see myself as being pro-union, but not a unionist. And I know that doesn't actually make sense, but that's how I feel. You know, when I think of unionism, I think of the main parties. I suppose I think of the DUP and I think of the UUP. And when I vote, I've never ever voted for the DUP. I do vote for the UUP because I see them as softer unionists and I like them. But I would be more an alliance voter myself, because that's what I'm more in favour of. If it came to a referendum, am I 100% that I would vote just automatically for the UK? No. I think I'll wait. I think I'll look at how things are. Would I just automatically vote for United Ireland? No. It'll very much depend on what the situation is at that time. So in that way, can I really claim to be a unionist? I'm not so sure. No. I come from a unionist area. You know, there are people in my family that are unionists. You know, I grew up with people that were unionist. I'm married to what's defined as a loyalist. So I have in some ways, an insider's view and an outsider's view of what is unionism. But I also am very aware that within unionism and within people who are unionists, that's a very wide swathe of people who have all different points of view, all different connections to the union. And if having an emotional connection to the other island over there is what makes you a unionist, then yes, I am. But if having an allegiance or a loyalty to unionist parties in Northern Ireland, then no, I'm not.
And in your case, Irish speaker, developing a love for the Irish language, sharing it with others, the daughter of a communist. Do you find that unionism, conventional unionism as we'd see it from here, that's suspicious of you, or does it accommodate you?
Overall, it has in many ways rejected me. That, I think, has changed over the years, and I've seen that very much again with the UUP, not with the DUP. Maybe slight softening, which is good to see. But generally, I have felt a sense of rejection because I'm not fitting the box of what some people regard as this is how you should be. If you're a Protestant or you're a unionist or you're a member of that community, then you shouldn't speak Irish. You know, should be your view. It should all be about the bands, the 12th of July. Now, a lot of Protestants just don't tick that box, and I think unionists need to be very, very careful, because when a referendum does come, they're going to be relying on people like me and other people within the Protestant community who are not ticking all those nice little boxes. They need them to vote to stay in the UK, and they need nationalist people, soft nationalists, who'll say, well, you know, my heart says Ireland, but actually, you know, so I think what unionism needs to do, it needs to be a lot cleverer, and it needs to woo people who do not seem to have just the traditional, you know, unionist mindset.
Philip, can you share with us your backstory, how that has shaped you and where it places you within that umbrella organisation of unionism?
Backstory. I suppose I really want to start by just saying a little bit about family history. For one thing, on my mother's side, I have an ancestor who was hanged in 1798. I've also got a name, a surname, that has tokens of 1798 in it, the death of William Orr, famously, which happened just before the Rising. And added to that story, my own paternal grandfather never voted ever for unionist parties in the North. He was born in the 1880s, probably, and when partition came, he never voted again. I think he was an old-style, shall we say, union inside the empire. He possibly would have been familiar with the politics of John Redmond and the Irish Parliamentary Party, and felt completely estranged by what had happened when partition came. So I want to mention those as sort of part of my backstory, and my awareness of all that led me in many directions towards, I remember one time keeping an Irish tricolour in my house, because I felt some sympathy and interest in, you know, the notion of all Ireland belonging. And I was involved with something called the New Ireland Group, which was run by Senator John Robb. But I changed in my thinking, and I think I've become more and more, if you like, pro-union. Again, I wouldn't say unionist necessarily, but pro-union. And a lot of it was to do with witnessing my father as a clergyman in the Shankill Road area of Belfast, and subsequently in Rathcoole Estate, a big loyalist estate. And I began to see, as I thought, a community that was struggling with a political representation that was not suitable or adequate to it, but also had imbibed, I thought, a lot of the time, a religious fundamentalism that was not helpful. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying here that a sincere Christian faith, wherever you're coming from, isn't valid, but a fundamentalism that stopped development by creating creationism at one end, and the second coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, known in the North as a rapture, at the other end. And when you stop history like that, you can't conceive of possibly evolving and changing and moving forward, moving on, which of course all cultures have to do. Ireland has had to do it in recent years, over the past 20, 30 years, with the whole change of the makeup and mix of Irish society. So I would say, in a kind of long way, that's where I'm at. I think I'm pro-union. I do think, Linda, there is a difference between being unionist and being pro-union. I spent a lot of my time in England. So I have a lot of fondness for England. I have a lot of fondness for English culture. I'm fascinated by the way in which Ireland and England have been mingling down through the years. But what I would like to maybe mention, and I'll finish here, I live in Carrickfergus when I'm in Northern Ireland. And I look out towards Scotland. And I am fascinated by the way in which in Carrickfergus, you know, I live in a street called Scotch Quarter. Famously, it's in a Louis MacNeice poem, if you know Louis MacNeice's poetry. But, you know, Scotch Quarter, where a Scottish settlement was. And it's not all of unionism by any means, but I think there's a component of it that's about looking out towards Scotland rather than looking towards the rest of Ireland. When I think of myself, for example, I've been twice in Cork. Once when I was 4, I don't remember it, and once for a few hours about 20 years ago. Not that I wouldn't love to go to Cork, but it's just simply the way I see things is, it crosses the channel. And it does so on a daily basis for me as I watch the ferry go to Cairnryan, past my window, past Scotch Quarter, every single day.
Glenn, where do you sit in that?
How many people have been to Cork, just out of interest? Hands up if you've been to Cork. So there are some hands there that aren't up. I'm just, you might have been there more often from Carrickfergus than a whole lot of people in the room. Just checking that. My wife is from Cork, by the way. Just letting you know. Before I went there, I was given a crash course. I went down as the writer-in-residence in the early 1990s. And somebody gave me a crash course in how to understand if somebody came to me in Cork and spoke to me, which was immensely helpful, and I met Ali, so that was great. And then after a couple of years of living in Belfast together, we were going back down in the car, and we got a flat tire just as we were going into Cork. And Ali, after 2 years in Belfast, she said, I'll talk to them in the garage because you'll never get it. And I watched her nodding through the windscreen as she talked to the guy who was offering to fix our car. And she got back in and I said, what did he say? And she said, I haven't a clue. So 2 years of Belfast. To those of you who are from Cork, welcome this evening.
Glenn, where do you fit in that space? In that, do you consider yourself a unionist, or who are you?
That's the question that's often been asked, but with 2 wee words between the who and are. I think what Linda said there was a brilliant summary. I think of the distinctions, and there are so many things. I think unionism is often a thing that is thrust upon you. I am sometimes, I hear myself referred to as a unionist, and of course you have to kind of try and unpack what that is. You are perceived as a unionist. That might be, as again Linda said, you come from a unionist neighbourhood or the background, but it's not the same as actively voting for a unionist party. Or identifying yourself primarily as that. And I similarly have, well, I won't say I never did, because I did grow up in a unionist, loyalist neighbourhood. We built bonfires. The 12th of July was a very, very big day. The 11th night was even bigger. And none of us would ever have been kissed without bonfires until we. So that was just, it was license, and that was just part of the upbringing. And I wouldn't say it was unthinking, but there was an awful lot of it that you didn't have to think too much about. But the way in which I now think about myself, that word would not be high up on the list of possible identities or identifiers. But in a way, that's okay. I think that Philip mentioned Louis MacNeice. I think the most potent piece of writing possibly in the last century by a writer from this island, but certainly from the north of the island, is Louis MacNeice's Snow, which is, I think, should be our national lyric. And it is a poem. If those of you who have been to Cork and also know Snow, would you please put up your hands? There you go. So Louis MacNeice's Snow, which talks about the drunkenness of things being various. In the world incorrigibly plural. And so that idea of multiple identities, I think, is something that a lot of people have tried to embrace, and that you can hold at any one moment, you can hold multiple identities. And in answer to your question, the who are you one, that used to be the prelude to getting a kick-in or worse, because there was only one answer or the other. And now if somebody asks me what I am, I would say to them, well, pull up a chair, sit down, we've got a long time here before you hit me. Stop me when you get to the one you don't like. Usually Manchester United, that would do it every time. So the answer is, who I am is lots of people.
We were talking upstairs just before we came down here, and do you feel when you cross what is a porous border, do you feel you're coming to a different place? Do you feel you're coming to a different jurisdiction? Because like most of us from the south, those of us a certain generation, when we travel up north, we were used to the better roads, to Caramac chocolate, to the red post boxes, to the better kept hedges. Now the road situation has changed. The border has disappeared, and it's easier to travel. But there's still that sense of, I think among some people from the south travelling north, there's still a sense of wariness, where they don't feel that this is great, they say yes, but they don't feel that they're fully connected there. And do you have that sense of difference and disconnection when you come down here, when you come down past Newry and suddenly you're in Dundalk?
Do you want to start at the other end?
Well, maybe with yourself starting.
Well, obviously, I am married to somebody from Cork now, so my cities are at either end of the island. I wrote a book a couple of years back called "The Last Irish Question: Will 6 into 26 ever go?" Which was, the graffiti when around the place where I grew up, where all of us probably grew up, we would have seen this graffiti, 6 into 26 won't go, which was the refusal to countenance a united Ireland. Excuse me, the nationalist or Republican version of that is 26 plus 6 equals 1. But I wrote this book really when I was hearing so much post-Brexit about the possibility of a referendum or the pressing for a referendum. And I wondered how much people in the 26 counties were prepared for, interested in what that might mean, because it sure as heck isn't just adding two numbers together. Was the rest of Ireland ready for the 6? And ready for the changes, and what changes might people countenance to their lives, to the way in which you, the flags you fly, all that stuff. And so I did travel around. It was also COVID was on at the time, so it was pretty hard to travel around, and every time restrictions were lifted, I just went to wherever they had been lifted. Thank you awfully for lifting so early. So that was really interesting, because I think coming to Dublin isn't coming to Ireland in the same way as going to London isn't going to England. And so I think probably for the first time in my entire life, I travelled around an awful lot. And guess what? There are 26 different versions of Ireland. So that's the short answer.
Philip?
Yeah, I think I would echo what Glenn says. My immediate reaction to what you said there, Tommy, was hold on a second. There's many different Irelands, and I've talked about Cork being a long way off to me, but Dublin, I'm up and down to Dublin and have been many times, lived in Harrington Street in a flat for a summer a long time ago. But I just wanted to say something else. I read in the Irish Times not so long ago, and correct me if I've got this wrong, in an article that something like 0.6% of students at Irish universities come from the north. Now, if I've got that wrong, correct me later on, but I think it's a small percentage. Now, that absolutely fascinates me and also appalls me, and I don't know quite why that is so. The reason it does shock me is because I've just been involved in writing a book about Friends School Lisburn. Some of you will maybe know better the Friends School in Waterford, founded in 1798. Earlier than that, in 1774, the Friends School in Lisburn was formed. But it's just been fascinating to me that back in the 1930s and in the 40s and in the 50s, people were coming to Dublin all the time to university, regularly so. In fact, the local headmaster who was installed in the 1930s through to the 50s was John Douglas, whose brother was, as I understand it, strongly involved in the Shannon here. And John Douglas, a friend of William Glynn, a famous Irish speaker. Do you follow me? That there was an interconnection backward and forward between Dublin, well, certainly, and Lisburn, which vanished. And yet at the same time, we supposedly have a peace process that is meant to be about, making the border, as you've put it, more porous. So there we go. That's my thoughts.
I'd be surprised by that statistic. It's certainly with somewhere like Trinity that is Donald Deeney involved in its board. You'd see a lot of northern connection there. And of course, Southerners travelling to northern universities, that's growing trend. Medical schools, say for instance in Derry, that's being planned, there'll be Southerners in that. So I don't know about that statistic.
Yeah, okay. I've put that statistic out, and I'm willing to have it challenged. What I will say is that, for example, from Friends School at the moment, which I've got to know quite well in writing the book because I taught there. There is nobody going to Dublin University. People are going over to England quite a lot. Almost 40 to 50% are going over to England. Not so much Scotland, but England. But there's certainly no great sign of students coming from, the majority would be from, I suppose, a Protestant pro-union background. No sign of them going to a southern university.
What in terms of your sense of this place when you come here, I was fascinated to hear you talking about watching those ferries, those ships going across, and how you're drawn in some respects across the sea rather than across the border. Is that changing? Is that being challenged? Or is that just the way it is?
I don't think it's being challenged, except in the way that I referred to it a little earlier, that getting to know loyalist communities, getting to know unionist areas better, getting to know the ex-security force community, which I have done quite a bit of work with, was through a PTSD centre basically in the north, which deals with those who were police, who were various UDR, various involvements in security at the time, and seeing the trauma and the damage of that. That has opened my eyes and challenged me about perhaps a slightly romantic view that I had at one time, that somehow, right now, I could do another 1798, I could be another William Orr, I could be another Archibald Warwick, who's the relation on my mum's side. And I think that was romanticism on my part, And
Linda, with yourself, there are Gaeltacht areas. Okay, there's a Gaeltacht in West Belfast now. There are Gaeltacht areas blossoming in parts of Derry. But of course you have the Donegal Gaeltacht and the Galway Gaeltacht, and you have Kerry and Cork where Irish is, and you have the Gaelscoileanna, growing force south of the border. Do you find an affinity with those places because of your love of the language, or do you still feel that you are crossing a border when you come here?
Yes and no. I'll share one story with you. I remember my organisation, we won an award, and it was going to be presented in Dublin. And I travelled down with another couple of Irish speakers from two other organisations in West Belfast. And I remember saying to them, I love when you get across the border, that sort of feeling, lovely feeling of freedom or something. And they both said, "What border's that, Linda?" So, my perception of things, I suppose, is very different from some people in Northern Ireland, and that's just the reality. But I think when we talk about that idea of a border, there's things that sort of fascinate me, and just in a sort of a wee random way, because sometimes people from my community talk about the other side of the border as somewhere really it's alien. Totally different from us. We are absolutely 100% different in Northern Ireland. We are Ulster people, but they don't recognise the 9 counties of Ulster. And, somebody who'd never really travelled, even within Ireland, when I actually am down at the border and I look across there, well, it doesn't look any different, and those people don't really appear any different. But at the same time, distance, when I've never been in Cork either, but I've been in Kerry. People were lovely, were very friendly, couldn't understand a word of their Irish, I have to be honest now. And you do feel different. But I also feel very different to people in England. I have an affinity with people in Scotland, but they're not the same as me. So though I am Irish, I'm a different part of Ireland. And I don't lose my Irishness because of that. And I see the border as something, whether you agree with it being there or not being there, it's an artificial border. We are all Irish people. We're just Irish people in different parts of the island. And I absolutely resent when somebody, and I'm talking about people from my own community here, tell me that I am not Irish. How dare they? I was born in Ireland. I've spent my whole life in Ireland. Of course I'm Irish. I'm British, but I'm still Irish. And a border's not going to change that.
Can I ask the three of you about this thing called unionism and the union and the future of the union? Do you think that in the society where you live, do you think that is politically sustainable, that it's going to continue, or is the tide going out? Do you feel a lack of interest in you, a lack of empathy from Westminster. You know, Conservative government maybe going to change next time, Labour government coming in. Do you feel that the plates are shifting politically? Now, you know, some of you have made a plain that you're not supporters of, say, the DUP, the main unionist party. But do you feel that unionism in some respects, in political terms in particular, that it's a sunset industry?
Philip Orr. Just think it was so... Thought we start in the middle this time, because we started at the other end. What I want to know is what's going to happen to unionism when, and it's not an if, it's a when, the referendum finally when the yes vote happens, because under the terms of the referendum, what happens is there's a referendum, and if the majority vote for the status quo, then you rerun the referendum in 7 years' time, and you keep doing that every 7 years, every 7 years, every 7 years, until the first time there's a vote in favour of a united Ireland, and then you don't run it again. That's it. So you can have like...
Sounds like Brexit.
Well, okay, but you can have that. So that's so the odds, I think, are somewhat stacked. I know Trevor Ringland disagrees with me on this, so I'm not declaring anything. I just think that if you were to look at that, you might think, you know, this might stretch out 3 centuries every 7 years. We just kind of go and do that, like you would change your car. Anybody here who's been to Cork knows Louis McNeeson changed their car more than once every 7 years? Please. Anyway, so I think it's highly likely at some point that might happen. So what happens to those people who think of themselves as unionist then? I think a unionist identity probably will still exist. And I'm really interested to know how, again, what are you going to do? What is the rest of the island going to do with a unionist minority? How is that going to be accommodated? What are the things that are going to be offered? Linda's absolutely right about unionism needing to make more effort to encourage people who are kind of a little bit indifferent about whether to remain part of the United Kingdom or to vote for United Ireland, whether they're Protestant by birth or Catholic by birth. But similarly, there is a job of work to be done in talking to unionists or people who identify as unionists or have unionism thrust upon them in the north. So I'm interested in what happens there. So I don't think that the DUP may come, like everything's going, all of this is going, everything's ending eventually. Somewhere down the line, none of this exists and the land masses move back together. But in the centuries before then, political parties will end. Certain of the ones that are, and another manifestation of a unionist party will be in existence that will negotiate that moment where there is perhaps a united Ireland. But that doesn't mean the end of a unionist identity, an affinity with, an identification with the other island.
Philip, what's your take on that, this sort of pressure on unionism of maybe it would seem that in some respects the tide is going out?
Well, I referred earlier to living in Carrickfergus, and I've been fascinated over the past few months when I've been living there, when all kinds of fairly catastrophic events have been in the news, including one involving a senior unionist politician. And you may guess, if you know the story, who I'm referring to. And I was fascinated by just, as I went up to the local pub and sat there with my friend, just the gaiety and the enjoyment and the ongoing nature of life. There have been, I think, for people from a unionist background, so many catastrophes, political catastrophes that have happened to them. I think that is a real factor. I mean, I mentioned earlier when we were talking upstairs, when you discover that someone who was in charge of the Irish Republican Army is suddenly in charge of your children as the Minister of Education in a new state, a new version of the state post Good Friday Agreement, you're pretty unshockable. And I think
it may have happened down here before. Just saying.
Yeah, yeah. But you know, it's yes. I mean, if you go back to the foundation of the state and so on, yes, and that is true. But I think that the point I'm making is that there's a certain degree of inuring and being inured to the experiences of the past few months, and I think also then that as time goes on, people will survive, and I think Glenn is right. People will keep on going and keep on living with a perspective that is very much pro-union. But who knows, things may indeed change after the referendum. I'm a bit suspicious of plebiscites, as you indicated. You know, the 1%. I've heard Republicans in Belfast talk about, once we get 51%, we're there. And you know, all the evidence of plebiscites around the world would suggest that they're potentially volatile material, and that they have to find some other way of being consensual. And I think that would be the important thing.
Linda?
Okay, well, I think the fortunes of unionism obviously lies within unionism. And what I see is, if unionism goes down a hardline road, you know, no, never, and they go back to the kind of days of Dr. Paisley and things, then they're not 100% doomed, but they're going to deteriorate and they're going to drop. I would be a big supporter of Doug Beattie, who has obviously taken a softer line. I think one of the problems that the UUP has had is they have softer, hard every time the leadership changes, and so voters don't know where they are. So I think they have to have courage, and they have to stick with Doug Beattie. They have to stick with his ethos, with his policies, even though they're not getting the rewards. I think eventually they will, because I think what's happening is younger people are much softer in their attitudes, they're much more liberal in their attitudes. And I think if the UUP hold their ground and hold that more liberal viewpoint and become even more liberal, then I think eventually we'll see the DUP numbers going down and the UUP coming up. And maybe, who knows, we could have a reverse of fortunes, that, you know, when the DUP was the tiny party and the UUP were in charge. But, you know, you can see the middle ground, like the Alliance coming up, and the UUP could threaten that very easily, but only if they have the courage and don't go down the, oh, well, my goodness, they're all voting for the DUP, so let's try and be another DUP. Because if you're going to vote for the DUP, you're going to vote for the DUP. You're not going to vote for the UUP, so why try and pretend to be the DUP, you know? So I think that it really lies with the UUP. If they want to be, with the unionist parties, if they want to be a relevant party that appeals to voters in Northern Ireland, they have to recognise that society in Northern Ireland is changing, and people are becoming more liberal, and they are, you know, softening their views, and they're not signing up as much to the old sort of tribal thoughts. There's mixed marriages, people are, you know, new communities, they're thinking about Brexit, they're thinking about, you know, would a United Ireland be better? Should I stay with the UK? Well, if they want to keep people in the UK, make it an attractive place. You know, make it welcoming to everybody, and don't say things like no Irish language, no this, no that, immigrants out, you know. That's not going to work at all. So I think, as I say, it lies within the unionist parties how they make Northern Ireland, how they sell it. And some of them aren't doing a very good job at the minute.
I think what you might pick up in a place like this, on a gathering like this, is that there's a recognition here that things are changing. You know, you see more and more academics carrying out surveys. How much would it cost for United Ireland? You see the rise of Sinn Féin, you know, where its priorities lie in terms of a border poll. But there's also a huge relief that, you know, last year, for the first year, there was no Troubles-related, paramilitary-related death in Northern Ireland, and people here see that as a success, and they want that to continue. And I think people are thirsting for knowledge about how they can make the debate a more positive exchange.
Could I, one thing that would be really, really, really helpful is that all the conversations about a referendum included what happens when the first vote is to remain exactly as we are. Because that bit, you know, the conversation that started, the conversation's fine, but you have to allow that there are different possibilities for the outcome. Now, I think that one of the things that perhaps would either alarm a lot of people up there or make them feel somewhat antagonistic to it is that they're not hearing the possibility of how Ireland carries on for at least another 7 years, as we are. And that's the bit, so I think that it sounds a little bit disingenuous. It's not a conversation if you already know, it's not a question if you already know what the answer is.
But that in itself is a very interesting point, because if you did have a referendum and if it was for the status quo, then it means for 7 years there's no more referendum. You have to wait 7 years. So you can look at that in a positive way. You can say, okay, things are quiet for the next 7 years. Or you can say,
planning, yeah, but that's the thing. That start planning for what that would be like, and so everybody's talking about planning for what happens when the vote is for. I can't remember which is yes and which is no. Anyway, for the bit that where 26 plus 6 equals 1, there are wedding bells, confetti, and all that sort of stuff. That for that moment, we're talking about what happens. Well, it just seems to me it's pretty logical to talk about the other bit as well, how Ireland lives, how we all live on the island of Ireland, with one part of it being part of the United Kingdom and one part not. If I could just say something, that I think the two people who I'm sitting here with on the stage, they've been so important in my own life, in the way I think about the place that I come from, the community word that we're also afraid of, because it just sounds like side. They represent what I have always thought was empowering about where I come from and the background that I come from, that it is actually so various, that it does include people who are in the Communist Party, it does include the people, the radical Presbyterians of 1798, it does include the Irish language, it is all of those things. And I lost my thread. There was a thread, and it just got lost.
Can I throw this question to the three of you? Brexit. You can say, hold on, you can say it was a destabilising force, that everything was tickety-boo until then, things were ticking along grand. Or you can say that Brexit has created this situation where Northern Ireland has the chance to have the best of both worlds, where it can live in harmony with the South next door, where both jurisdictions can attract foreign direct investment because of their unique identity. So which view do you take of Brexit? Could it be, ultimately, could it be a positive thing that could help the Union to discover a new identity that's sustainable for unionism? Or is it something that's going to accelerate the debate towards a united Ireland? Two completely different views.
Well, I think, the last lot of years has been very destabilising because of Brexit, and it's raised all sorts of questions that weren't coming up. In the future, I suppose what I'm going to say is I had never heard people openly in my own community talking about the possibility of voting for United Ireland, there being a United Ireland. It was just a closed conversation. So that I found strange, I suppose, but also maybe in a way liberating, because, as I say, I'm not sure what way I would vote, and I think that, that's up to me. And I'd like to see in Northern Ireland the freedom for people within the nationalist community, people in the unionist community, to decide not on the old tribalism, but actually on the question and the answer, whether it happens in 10 years a referendum or 20 years, what is going to be good for us? What's going to be good for, for both parts of our country, for the South and for Northern Ireland? I hope it won't be like Brexit. I hope people will actually get factual information, and I hope they'll have peace and confidence to sit down and work it out for themselves and decide, this is what I would like. this would work for me, this would work for my family, my children, my grandchildren, rather than I'm Catholic, so I must do this, or I'm Protestant, so I must do this, or otherwise I'm going to be viewed as a traitor or whatever. So in some ways, though, it has been destabilising, and there's been many times I've thought, what on earth did they start all that for? And maybe I still feel like that at certain times, because it has seemed to have brought a lot of trouble with Brexit. But it has opened conversations that I suppose have to be had.
Philip?
Yeah, I think tied up with Brexit has been the emergence of strong Scottish nationalism. Now, the Scottish National Party is in some difficulties at the moment, for sure, but I think there has been a real surge of awareness in Scotland of being a very distinctive place that perhaps merits having a status as one of the Northern European independent countries. So I think that has been a bit difficult for many in the Unionist community to handle and to appreciate that Scotland. Well, let me put it this way. I remember one time on the Falls Road seeing Scottish flags go up outside a Republican club for the first time. You follow me? Whereas they were always on the Loyalist side. So I think tied up with Brexit has been the Scottish issue, and I think that's a very interesting one, and perhaps sometimes a conundrum for Unionists. But I want to say that some of the work that I remember doing, cross-community work, in places like Ardoyne and Woodville, Loyalist and Republican areas in Belfast, we tossed a lot of these things around, and one of the things was, would you be prepared to give up your flag? Now, I don't mean give up the Union flag, I mean give up the tricolour. If the Irish tricolour is no longer, simply a given, but can be put on the table as a bargaining tool, would you be prepared in the audience, for example, to say, yeah, okay, we'll give up the tricolour? I know that it says green, white and orange, and it is an inclusive flag by its origins, but to many people, it may have been coloured, red with blood because of what happened during the conflict. So, and one could think of other bargaining points as well, that might need to be made. So, the changes, if there ever is some kind of settlement on Ireland that makes it more cohesive, the changes would need to be on all sides.
Glenn?
I just found the end of the thread that I was looking for earlier on. So I crossed both my fingers, but it sort of relates to that, because what I was trying to say was that over a period of a few decades, I think there have been such interesting conversations in the North, and I think a lot of them have emanated from people who have felt ill at ease with that label of unionism, and talking about who they are and how they relate to the rest of this island and to the other island. And what I think, predating the ceasefires, there was this sense that perhaps what we needed to do was to look at, I think probably it's written into the language now of the Good Friday Agreement, this phrase, the totality of relationships. So I thought that really was true, that both these islands were going to look at how we all existed, how we existed next to each other, and respected the cultural penetration, how much of Ireland is in England. To me, London and Dublin, the south of England, they're so much closer than Belfast and Dublin. I lived in Manchester for years. I felt far more at home in Manchester than any other bit of it, because I recognised that it looked like Belfast. So I thought, that's what we needed to do, and I think that's what I was trying to say when mentioning Philip and Linda. I think that they have been part of that thinking again about how we live on the island and the two islands side by side. Just to pick up on the Brexit, the vote. It has been destabilising. There is a bit of me that thinks, I would not write off Brexiteers. I would not assume that I know how anybody who's a friend of mine voted, because, as with everything, you look at what the government you've got is, and you look around, you think, well, somebody here voted for that. There is no thing that has ever no union, no association of nations, no nation that has existed from the dawn of time to the present day. All of these things will eventually end, and you should never be part of something that you cannot vote to leave. That seems to me to be a fundamental. You might hate it, but I will respect the democratic wish of the majority. That is what it is to be a Democrat. So Brexit, I absolutely hate. I am a European, and I will be I'm a European whether the United Kingdom is part of the European Union or not. That doesn't stop me being a European. But what Philip said there about all those things on the table and how do you change, what would you give up? I think that is part of the conversation that ought to be having. And I've got to tell you, my experience when I was writing that 6 into 26 book was that we'll give up anything except all the things that you're going to suggest that we'll give up. We'll give up the penny black stamp. How's that for you?
You know what I'd love you to do? We've been listening to your views and how you're analysing things. And I'd just like you to share with the audience what you're at in your own professional lives at the moment, what projects you're on, what direction your careers are taking, because that will give some insights as well for our audience. So maybe, Philip, I'd start with you.
Yeah, I was I was a teacher for many, many years, partly in a Quaker school. And then after that, I was involved for many, many years in what I would call a kind of community work, which involved you trying to use the arts in different community contexts. I'll just mention this before I talk about what I'm doing now, if you don't mind. For example, we wrote a play, myself and another person would write a play. We would trial it in the community, would take it around different community groups, and then would have a discussion. And the play was always about some white hot topic in Irish history. And the discussions and the debates that we had about it at a grassroots level were absolutely fascinating. However, I decided just a few years back that I always had cherished the idea of being a counsellor, working as a psychotherapist, and I trained in it. And so now I'm living mostly in Carrickfergus, but also partly where my partner lives in Hertfordshire. And I'm working in therapy and working as a therapist. One of the things that does interest me greatly is the role of fundamentalist childhoods in how the politics of the north of Ireland was shaped inside unionist politics. Now, I'm not talking about evangelical, I'm not talking about, sincere Christian faith. I'm talking about the kind of thing that I grew up in, which was there's a rapture coming very quickly with Jesus Christ coming back. You're a pretty sinful guy, you're in trouble, you're in real danger, and there's a kind of totality of belief system that embraces you and takes you over. And so I've trained up as part of my training as a therapist in fundamentalist childhood abuse, and how, this is a phrase that comes from America, but I think it's very true, how religious trauma can impact you. And I think I alluded to it earlier, the way in which fundamentalism stops development by setting up the notion of a young earth creationism prior to us being around here. And then it ends up with a sudden bang of Jesus coming back. And that prevents movement. And I think that there's a real political dimension to then the kind of work that I would like to be a little bit involved in.
Glenn, I think the Northern Bank, that was your work, wasn't it? The Northern
Bank.
The
Northern Bank job, yeah.
That was a great BBC.
I did it. It was me. What's that?
That was a wonderful BBC series.
A radio series that was turned into a podcast. As now everything that goes on the radio becomes a podcast. So I get emotional just thinking about it. 26.5 million. Anyway, so yeah, I did that. So I'm doing a couple of radio things at the minute. I'm writing a screenplay about Louis MacNeice. Could you have guessed that? No.
Snow?
No, not about snow. About Autumn Journal, his great long poem of 1938, which actually is not just one of the great works of the pre-war era, one of the great long poems in the English language. It's also increasingly feels very, very pertinent again. He was writing that just in what looked like the last months before the start of the Second World War, which everybody was expecting in the autumn of 1938. So yeah, I'm working on that screenplay. I'm director of the Seamus Heaney Centre at Queen's University Belfast, and we're just about to move into a new building at the university. So yeah,
how is that going?
How's that going?
Yeah.
It's good. Everybody's got a couple of quid. We're still fundraising. Just saying. I just saw there was an honesty box out there. I might just put another wee label over that this evening. If you see Seamus Heaney, no, it's going okay. Seamus Heaney Centre at Queen's, it was opened 20 years ago. And it was a centre for poetry, but it was also from the very beginning centre for creative writing. And so it's like Seamus Heaney himself. It's a place that's interested in poetry, but Seamus was a broadcaster of note. He was a dramatist. He was a translator. So all of those facets of his writing life are reflected in the stuff that we do.
And Linda, the Turris, how is the project going?
Turris is going really, really well. It is growing year on year.
Numbers, what sort of numbers?
Well, this year we signed up about 500 people for classes. We have about 22, 23 classes per week.
In East Belfast? In
East Belfast, all levels and abilities. We have a lot of Bunrang classes, but we also go right up the Ardrang. We started to raise money a few years ago to send people to university, so we have a good number of people who have done the diploma at Ulster University, and this year, during the summer, we will have 5 people who will graduate from both Ulster University and Queen's University with degrees in Irish, so I'm really, really proud of that. My biggest piece of work has been our niece school, our nursery school, so we started that 3 years ago. We're in our 3rd year of our operation. Didn't start off well. We had a bit of intimidation and threats and had to move a few times, but we got money from the Irish government. I'm very, very grateful to the Irish government because we've got almost £500,000 through the Shared Island Fund, and we will move from a Presbyterian church, a shared space, into our own space this summer and open up in September, not just as a niece school, but as a bund school. We are absolutely unique because we are part of the integrated sector, but we teach through Irish medium, so we're the only integrated school, nursery school, that teaches through Irish. And as I say, we started off with very controversial intimidation and threats, and now we're just becoming part of the community, part of the fabric of the community. Had a couple of really lovely things where the Craigie Road in East Belfast, we were out sort of giving out leaflets about the niece school and bund school at a local event, and we were sort of targeting young families, and I'd say 99% of the young families that we spoke to said, "Oh no, we're already signed up. We know all about you. We've signed up." And we were up in a housing estate giving out leaflets, and there was a young fella walking down with a dog, and I went over to give him a leaflet, and I always start with, we're part of the integrated sector. And he said, "You are that Irish school, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Me and my partner don't have any children, but we're trying, and we have already discussed it, and they will be going to you." So I said, "Amor, good luck."
And are there adult classes as well?
Oh yeah, as I'm saying, we have about 22, 23 adult classes every week. So from all levels and ability. We have a singing class, we have a storytelling class, we have a reading class, we have a family class once a month. So no, it's really, really vibrant. We also started an initiative probably last year, group of Mentorachty mentor groups, and we have about 150 people involved in that. So the people that have been with us for a good lot of years, who started off, in Bunrang, who are now getting the language, they mentor small groups, maybe 3 or 4 people. And the lovely thing about that is it helps with the fallout, it helps to encourage people, supports them in their learning. It's also fantastic for the mentors themselves because it really gives them a bit of drive and a bit of ambition. But it also creates community. And I always pride myself on tourists, my organisation, that just, we're an Irish language provider, but we're more than that. We are a community of learners and speakers. We're just people coming together, people learning the language. And the majority of our learners are from the Protestant community because we're based in East Belfast, but we're a very cross community. And I always say, just people coming together, friendships being created. We've even had 2 marriages. And I used to say 1 baby, but another baby was born a few days ago. So now, 2 marriages, 2 babies, and another one on the way. So there you go.
Just one final question on that. Is there any Ulster Scots dimension to your work?
Yeah, we do. We delve a little bit into the Ulster Scots, and it's kind of interesting because, from my own personal point of view, I had no interest whatsoever in Ulster Scots until I started to learn Irish. I always kind of viewed it like a bit of, that was a bit ridiculous, that's not a language. And it was Irish speakers who pulled me up and said, hold on a wee minute, Linda, you need to look at that. Also, people who had no interest in Ulster Scots, but they were going to use it as a stick to beat me with, which again forced me to have a look at what it is. And one of the things that really, really interested me was when I realised that Scots is a language and Ulster Scots is a dialect of Scots. That's the official line. But they overlap. If you look at Scots and Ulster Scots, it's full of Gaelic, absolutely full of Gaelic. So when you embrace one, you're really embracing the other. And I say that to Irish speakers, and I say it to Scots and Ulster Scots speakers. If you start ridiculing the other, you're ridiculing your own language. And as people in Ulster, and further afield, Donegal and whatever, we draw on both of those languages. They're part and parcel of who we are. They're part and parcel of our identity. And again, it's another thing that I resent, this being put into a box with your Protestant, so Ulster Scots is your thing, your Catholic, Irish is your thing. That is just wrong. It's incorrect because we draw on it all, and why shouldn't we? We're surrounded by these languages. They don't take anything away from us, and the fact that we can have both, it enriches us.
It's a sort of a perfect end line. If you ridicule something in a way, you're ridiculing yourself. On that note, I'm going to throw open the session to a question from our audience. I see lots of them. Lady and gentleman down here. We'll start here. Thank you, sir. A microphone coming to you. I'll get your question then, sir, down here. And I just want to say, if people have big, long statements to make, I'll cut you off at the knees.
Good.
Because this is our audience. These are our guests.
My name was Ethan Hill, apart from Tyrone. It's now Edith Sagara, and I taught for many years at Trinity. Would the discussion have been different if we had a couple of unionists under 35, one of whom would be from a working class background?
Well, just on the
Will
class.
we take the second question and then?
Sorry.
Lovely.
Yeah, thank you for the talk. My question is around the changing nature of the union itself, which has become politically more devolved. Scotland, the English regions, socially more liberal. Even the monarchy has changed. So what kind of union, you all express being pro-union, what kind of union are you attracted to and do you want to be a part of?
Thank you. 2 great questions. Away you go.
Can't answer to the under 35. You're absolutely right. The class was somebody from a working class background. Under 35 and from a working class background. Oh, okay. So not just under 35, but the 2 things. There had to be both of those. Yeah, okay. Well, yes, it probably would have sounded very different because, if you had people of 36 and from a working class background, you would get different voices. So I don't think that you should assume that everybody who's under 35 and working class will sound exactly the same way. It would depend very much on who the under 35-year-old was. It would be, I would like to think it could be as surprising as possibly unless none of this surprised you, it could be every bit as surprising.
Philip?
Yeah, just in response to the question about what attracts, what attracts me or what attracts many people to the union, I think that's again a very diverse range of things. I think Britain is big enough, and diverse enough at the moment, and going through changes itself. And I think that what will attract pro-union people to it is that there's a big bag of things that you can be attracted to. One of the things can be, if you feel a sense of identification with Scotland, that you pursue that and you have a strong sense of that. But if you are, attracted to some of the urban verve of London at the moment, you're drawn to that. So that there are many things I think that can be looked at as being key factors for those who wish to and feel drawn to the union. Yeah, the union is changing, but the thing is to be able to adapt to those changes, and I think that adaptation, I have every faith that adaptation can occur.
Well, I think it's an interesting question about under 18 and working class. And one of the things I see, I see extremes. I see young people who are, again, not signing up to the sort of stuff there was when I was that age. They're interested in environmental issues. They're interested in women's right to choose. They're interested in equal marriage. Those are the sort of political issues that they're much more interested in. But there's also very much a class issue at home, and that still exists. So you will get, quite a few young people who, they may as well have been in the 1980s. They didn't, know anything about the Troubles. They didn't witness it. But God love them, they are living it in their minds, and they're still coming out with that same rhetoric. And that's very much, and it's the same thing on the other side of the community as well. That's very much a working class thing. But I do overall see younger people as much more liberal, much more not signing up to it, much more freedom to mix with the other community, and opportunity, looking for other things in life, and probably a bit embarrassed about the past. And I think one of the things that struck me a number of years ago, 16 years after the Good Friday Agreement, it suddenly struck me that I was born at the end of 1961, so I was born 16 years after the end of the Second World War. But even though my granda fought in the war, it wasn't real to me. It had no meaning to me. I didn't hate the Germans, so I'm hoping that young people in Northern Ireland, and I think the majority of them are there, the Troubles is something of the past, but unfortunately there are smaller numbers, and I blame this on the glorification of war that happens both in Republican communities and Loyalist communities, that they think they missed something wonderful. And I think that is problematic and very frightening. You said about the kind of UK unionism and this idea, and I suppose I put it down to Britishness. I like the Britishness that I see over in that other island. I like the pluralism over there. I kind of like the BBC in that way of life. But I'm not so sure sometimes that I like the Britishness that I see in my own country that tells me and imposes, and I liked Glenn, that this thing is imposed on you, that you have to be this, that you have to be, you have to think this way. I don't like that in my own country, but I do like the Britishness over there.
By the way, can I just...
Please do.
Yeah, just add in, I think that there's a remarkable amount of mixing. For example, in downtown Belfast now, with no troubles there to worry about, and a lot of young people from Loyalist communities, under 35, whatever, will be mixing with other young people. New identities come along, for example, LGBT as an identity, which means, whenever Gay Pride Day happens, in Belfast is a big march, that there's an incredible rich array of people from all communities, working class and Loyalist and other, in those events.
And there is still too, I'm the father of an 18-year-old. I know some of the things that get said, some of the questions that get asked. And, there's a lot of stuff that, and I'm sorry if I sounded a little bit facetious when I was saying that about under 35 and working class. I just think it's your question is a very, very good one about the age. The class, as Linda said, is there is a working class. There are questions about the various communities and working class communities, but I just think everything is much more complicated. I think that some of the most appalling things I have heard said, or my daughter has told me have been said, have come from people who you might say were from a more middle class background. And here's another thing. There's one really, really interesting thing is the things that I hear said from here by the next generation, the younger generation, the under 35s. And there are assumptions about Northern Ireland and about what's going to happen. And I've heard things said about there will be no orange marches. They just won't happen. We're going to stop them. Sure, why would they need? And there are things like this. There's a kind of an unexamined. Linda was talking about people who they didn't know the Troubles and they think it was a very exciting time. Everything was more vivid, but there's something that's happening about the foreshortening of the 20th century here. That somehow the 1916 to 1923 and 1969 to 1994, that the gap between those is contracting, and it's just been looked at as, you can hear it represented, as part of the longer war. And in that, there's not a great deal of space for people who, in those years between 1921, formation of Northern Ireland, and the, say, 1998, the Good Friday Agreement, who identified as Unionist. I think there are a lot of very, very atavistic attitudes still abroad, and unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, I think just they do not reside only in one class or with one age group.
Some more questions. I saw 1, 2, and Sir here as well. So maybe we'll start. Have we 2 at the back? Maybe we'll take those 2, and then we'll take these 2 here. Thank you.
Do you, or those who are pro-union, feel resentful or upset that almost every time you come to the South, you're either asked explicitly or implicitly, are you in favour of a united Ireland, or how are you going to vote? And if you demur in any way, there's a coolness of the welcome, shall we say. And just as a follow-up, do you think, Linda, the plurality that you see that's attractive in the United Kingdom, are we anywhere close to that in the South?
I think, yes, the South. Can I? Sorry.
Can we take just a second question as well, Linda, and then we'll... Thank you, sir.
That was a 2 and 1, wasn't it? Was that not?
We'll go for the third then.
Okay, 3 for the price of.
Sir.
Donald O'Brien, prompted by something Philip said about the John Robb led, or he was the personality, the New Ireland movement, and also prompted by a recent article by David McWilliams in the Irish Times. Is there any sense in the Presbyterian side of Northern Ireland of, let's say, more self-governance as a reaction to Brexit? Because David McWilliams was saying that in Switzerland it was the Calvinist Geneva side that drove the Swiss democracy. He actually got it wrong, but that's a different point.
Thank you. Linda, you were going to start before I interrupted you.
I forget what night what the 2 were. So I know one was about the that it was a sort of cold house if you're not in favour of a united Ireland, and I would say the opposite. What I find in the South, there's a couple of things in the South. I find as a Protestant from Northern Ireland, and totally respectful. I'm not being disrespectful towards people, but I know when I come down here and I speak, there is a feeling sometimes of being an exhibit in a zoo, because you're this kind of strange, and I'm a working class Protestant from Northern Ireland, so I know I'm ticking sort of 3 strange boxes for people in the South. So there is this kind of, oh my, what is this, sort of thing. But I don't think people are disrespectful if I said, no, I'm not in favour of a united Ireland. In fact, just the opposite. I think that's what people expect, so I find people are very respectful of that opposite view, and you know, that's what they expect they're going to get, and if they're probably more surprised if you were to turn around and say, no, I'm not. So that's not an issue at all. You asked another question, though.
Plurality?
Yeah, no, I do. Well, I mean, obviously the South has really changed, and, you know, the South is now becoming more like London or England, and, you know, with some good things and some bad things about that, and we're being left behind. Northern Ireland is becoming, you know, what people would have regarded as the South, kind of old-fashioned and out of step and, you know, behind the times. I mean, I have a granddaughter who is gay, and she's in Glasgow, and she married a nurse in Glasgow, and they're very happy. She will never come home to live because her wife says, you know, we are dinosaurs in Northern Ireland. And that's a very sad thing. And I know before our law changed, she said, Granny, you know, I could not get married in my own country. You know, and I thought that was very sad. So, no, I see the South really has moved on a lot.
Can I respond to the question at the back there about Presbyterianism? And I think John Robb sometimes occupied the space of being, you know, a very special Presbyterian who cherished the liberal tradition. I remember going to New Ireland Group meetings where there was this blue flag that was put on display, which he thought should be the flag of the New Ireland. He talked about, should there be a new capital for a New Ireland, you know, which I thought would have been maybe in Athlone or somewhere, I can't remember. But what I would say about Presbyterianism, I personally think that and I think I'm right, that it's taken certain backward steps. It has cut itself off from the Scottish mother church, if you like, in Scotland, and particular over the issue of the attitude to same-sex unions. And I think also there has been a growing theology inside the Presbyterian Church there that is very centered on what's called reformed culture, you know, of Calvin and of John Knox and so on. And I think that the earlier Presbyterian tradition that we look back to, you know, which we saw manifested to some degree in the 1790s, though it met a tragic end, and you think in 1798, that has been pushed to one side. What I will say, I go to a little church in Carrickfergus called the Harbour Community Church. And inside that church, there has been a welcome given to everybody, and I mean a genuine welcome, not a tokenistic welcome, to everybody from whatever gender background, whatever choice of gender, whatever choice that they make about themselves. And, you know, ceremonies have been, you know, taken place inside that church. It's a very relaxed little place. I even take my dog along to church, right? I take my dog along. It's a relaxed environment, and it's right in the heart of Carrickfergus. So I think that, you know, I see that as being full of potential, but it's right outside the Presbyterianism that I think has taken too many backward steps, though I hope that it may change. By the way, Carrickfergus in 1640s was where the first presbytery happened, so just a few yards down the road there's this community church which is quite separate from denominational affiliation.
Could I do a two Ronnies thing and answer the question from before? Just go back to the question about the union. I'm not quite sure that we did say, or all of us did say, how pro-union we were, but I think there is a bit of me that knows that I am absolutely culturally British, and I'm absolutely culturally Irish as well. Those two things sit quite easily with me, and I don't want to choose, and I want to, and I don't want to apologise, but I think that would be helpful if we were all able to recognise just how much of the culture, and, you know, God, we get into that word, how much there has flowed backwards and forwards, up and down, across, you know, that. So that's what it is. You know, there's so many things there. My younger daughter is thinking about going to university in Scotland, Her sister went to university in London. They're also thinking about looking at Dublin. So all of those things being available to us, I think, just makes us more. And it's the same. It's not about university. It's not just about education. It's about employment. It's about that freedom to move and to feel that you belong or can belong anywhere on these islands. That's the place that I want to live in. That's what I thought we were doing in 1998 collectively. I thought we were doing something like that. And I don't even know if I'm answering anybody's question anymore, but I was just thinking, I did a piece around about Brexit down in Forkhill in County Armagh about what Brexit meant. And I was talking to somebody and she said, when the border posts were there, she said, I used to go down and shop in Dundalk, just to go through. And then as soon as I got rid of the border posts, I just started to shop in Newry. And when I asked what it meant, how did you see the future? She said, a united Ireland, but with a border still in it. So there's a kind of I have a northern sense that is, it can be a capital N or it could be a lowercase n. All of these things, the new Ireland, I keep saying to Philip, was I at that? Because over the years, a lot of these conversations, I think, have been going on. And when I think about it, they've been going on for decades. And maybe the truth is we've just always been talking. And maybe that's no bad thing. Always been talking, always been thinking. And I think maybe some of that's invisible. It's been, the broad label of unionism or nationalism has kind of squashed those things, and what Linda said so eloquently at the very beginning of this kind of lifts the lid on how various it always has been.
I'm going to ask. I want to get our 2 additional questions in here. Lady here and gentleman here. Thank you. With a microphone coming to you now. And my Cork-born wife would take note of how your daughters are not considering UCC, sir.
Their grandparents live next to it.
Good evening. I'm interested about language. I'm from Brittany in France, and we feel that we are not French. We are from Brittany. So that means I was wondering if you feel that Irish would be the link between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. When I arrived here 24 years ago, many parents here were saying, well, why are we teaching Irish to the children? They are not going to need the Irish. And I'm impressed to know that East Belfast, Protestants are learning Irish, and I feel that is really a good idea about belonging, about a nation. That's my question.
Thank you. And sir?
I just make a couple of points, and making the points, I'm actually posing questions, so you don't have to take me off at the knees. Paramilitary tried to do that some years ago, and it didn't succeed. I'm a unionist. I'm proud of being a unionist. I'm happy with a unionist, because a unionist is happy with his position within the United Kingdom. I'm pleased to be a member of a multinational, multicultural, multilinguistic, liberal, pluralist democracy. And that's what the United Kingdom is to me. I was born much earlier than Linda. I was born in 52. But all through my life, even though we were strongly unionist, there was a very strong undercurrent of being Irish. I mean, we felt Irish. Nobody spoke Irish, of course, but we felt Irish. We'd have said the only time my father ever didn't sign himself in as Irish was if we came to Dublin once in a blue moon for a long weekend. He always took great pains to sign when he asked your nationality. Always put Northern Ireland. Funny, he didn't say UK, but he put Northern Ireland. So I don't see those two things as being mutually exclusive. It's all about putting emphasis on those aspects of your which are important to you. Some people put more emphasis on the Irish language. Other people put more emphasis on other things. And I've never felt alien in Dublin. I've been coming down here for 40 years more. I've never ever felt I felt it was a different place, but I never ever felt like it was an alien place. I never felt it a threatening place. And I think a lot of unions are like that. I mean, and so that's what I mean. For example, I'm a member. You're talking about the liberal Presbyterians. You should check out our church. I'm a non-subscribing Presbyterian and a Unitarian, so it puts me in an even bigger minority. And I'm also a past master of Dublin and Wicklow Orange Lodge. But
thank you, sir.
Okay.
So this lady, would you like to respond to? Sorry, I just see one final question here, and a man behind you.
It might be like
okay. We'll take those last two here and just behind.
There was a recent survey conducted, and majorities in England, Scotland, and Wales seem to be reasonably happy with the United Ireland happening. And what kind of reaction does that provoke in unionism when you might be pro-union, but people in Britain might be somewhat indifferent about Northern Ireland being in that union?
If it had been a poll in England, Scotland and Wales about whether Northern Ireland should unite with Russia or anywhere, they would said yes as well. I don't think they really care where we go.
Yeah, I see there's just one other question, and then we'll take all your responses.
I was just wondering the labels that I used, Catholic and Protestant, and in Irish history. And I was wondering, do the panel think that maybe these two terms, they will stop using them?
Okay. Right, final thoughts. Who wants to start?
I think Linda should start with the question that was on language.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, so it's very interesting and lovely to hear somebody who's a Breton. I actually worked with a girl who was a Breton. She was a French teacher in the school that I taught in, and her parents were Breton speakers, but she had lost a lot of it herself. She married a fella from here, and she said one night they were out and he didn't have Irish, but she heard people speaking Irish, and she said she couldn't understand the word they were saying, but she said just the rhythm of the language, there was something about it made her feel at home, and she said it was very reminiscent, and of course they're all part of the Celtic languages. You brought up a good point about, why do people, learn Irish? What's the point of learning Irish? Why? And I know I hear a lot of that in the South. It's sort of inflicted on us. I would say to people in the South, it's very easy. It's a bit like, you never miss the water till the well runs dry. And if we removed Irish tomorrow, there'd be a lot of people shouting down here rather than, we don't want to learn it, it's forcing us. Now, what's interesting in Northern Ireland is, and I don't know what the situation is down here, but people quite often, again, people from my own community will say, you'd be better off learning French or Spanish, love. But here's the reality. There's more jobs in Northern Ireland for people who have qualifications in Irish, who speak Irish, because we've got an Irish medium sector with a lot of schools, Irish medium education sector. We have Irish language media. Really, we're making fantastic films and fantastic television programs. We have youth clubs. We have a community sector. There is a lot of work, and that work is growing, and I'm part of that work. And also, fantastic social scene, bands, cultural scene. So the Irish language is a richness, an absolute richness, and why would you want to let that go? So I sometimes do feel a wee bit annoyed at people in the South, and I'll finish just with one story. I was speaking at an event in Belfast, and as I was speaking about my work, I could see a man in the audience, and he was raging, and I could see his face. He was really angry. So, unfortunately, I thought he was somebody from my own community. But when it came to the question and answers, and he spoke, I realised he was a Southerner, and he started shouting about, it was forced on us and all this carry on. And before I got an opportunity to respond, a woman a couple of rows back who had no connection with me, no connection with the work that I do, but happened to be from East Belfast, said to him, will you tell you shut your mouth, I'm from East Belfast, we never got the chance to learn it, so just give you over. And he hadn't another word to say, so there you go.
Philip?
I just wanted to acknowledge a couple of things that have been important, I think, in broadening out experiences for a lot of young people. A thing called EMU occurred in schools, Education for Mutual Understanding, and it goes back to the 1980s, and it brought young people from different school backgrounds together on a regular basis, and still does. And I think, you know, we're seeing some of the legacy of that now, you know, in the post-ceasefire era. But the other thing I want to mention is, because it's something that I was personally involved in, the whole journey back to understand the period of the First World War, indeed the political centenaries generally back then, you know, are an issue. But the whole experience of the First World War has been a remarkable thing for a lot of young men of, well, young and working class men, coming to understand a little bit about the Irish identity that their soldiers had. They were in the Royal Irish Rifles from Belfast. And I think that also involved journeys into record offices, journeys down into libraries to find out more, and lots of journeys down to Dublin and even to Cork by train, which can sometimes be for free now. And a lot of people, I think, found out more about themselves and about their Irishness, and not seeing it as contradiction to their Britishness in working class communities. I would venture that that is absolutely true. And, you know, the work that a lot of us tried to do, you know, understanding that and bringing that story up so that it didn't become colonized as one narrative only, but a complex narrative, was very, I think, important.
Thank you, sir. I'll leave the last words to you. Glenn?
Well, I actually just was looking behind me, and I was looking at the discourse series. What's that called? Pop-up? Is that a pop-up? It's a pop-up. The discourse series pop-up. I'm guessing they didn't have discourse series pop-ups when they started. But I was looking at it and I was just thinking what an incredible privilege and honor it is to be part of that series. And I don't know about the rest of you, I have just really enjoyed the opportunity to talk, to listen. And my greatest anxiety is that there's just not enough opportunities like this, or the time that we are able to devote to something like this. You know, some of the things that we've talked about, thinking about in Northern Ireland, these are conversations, these are things that, it's not that they've never been said. They have been said, they've been said and said again. We've made TV programs, made radio programs, we've written things, but we live in a world where the shorter message is very quickly transmitted, and I think that all I would just want to say is that how wonderful to be able to sit, to talk, and I just hope that you know, the opportunities for thinking before acting, for listening as well as speaking, are taken, and that goes against the current of the flash message and the instant response, because I think we are in greater danger, all of us, from those things than we are from anything to do with some of the things we've been talking about tonight. Anyway, thank you, and thank you all for coming this evening as well.
I have a last special request, Linda. You weren't expecting this. Will you tell the story of the Banya and the Ishka? I love that story because it's all about understanding and misunderstanding.
So we have a wee knee skull, as I said, and the pre children come in at different stages when they come in at 2 years and 10 months. And they don't come from families that have Irish. They come in with no language at all, but they don't hear any English once they come in. But everything is quite simple, and it's done through sort of, you know, signs and facial expressions and whatnot. So this little one had started, and they get their sus, you know, their break. And one of the things that will happen is they'll be offered Banya, no Ishka. So milk or water for the non-Irish speakers. And some of the children will just point at first because they're quite shy, then they'll learn to go, oh, Banya, and then they'll go, Banya leda hull, and then they'll learn, oh, Bawailam Banya leda hull, or Bawailam Ishka leda hull. So this wee new one had come in, and she's sitting and she's watching the other children, and again, they're at different stages, oh, Bawailam Banya, whatever, and she pointed at the Ishka. So I poured the Uisce into her cup, and she sat there, and she took a sip, and she went, "Oh, this Uisce tastes just like water."
So the conclusion to our session is these unionists are just like Banya or Uisce or whatever. Thank you very much for being such a lovely audience.
Thank you very much to all of our panel, to our three panelists. Tommy, as chair, did a great job there as mediator. Linda, Philip and Glenn. And I'm sure everybody will agree that it was a most interesting and stimulating discourse. That I think Glenn summed it up very well there at the end, so I'm not going to even try doing that. Just from an academy point of view, I'd like to thank Professor Mary O'Dowd, she recently stepped down from her position as Secretary of the Academy, but she has been involved in organising the discourse programme over the past 3 years, and this is the last discourse that she organised, and it was really a very good one and great one and very stimulating. And I'd just like to welcome Professor Dan Carey, who is taking over as the new Secretary of the Academy, and he's somewhere here with us this evening. He's down there at the back. Welcome, Dan. And you have a good record now to keep up to with the discourses we've had. So just to finish up, the next discourse in the series will be the future of the EU, bigger and better, and that's a conversation between EU Commissioner Mairead McGuinness and broadcaster Olivia O'Leary, MRIA, and that will take place on the 23rd of May. So anybody and everybody is welcome to come again, and I'm sure we'll see some of you here and a different audience and lots of stimulating questions as well and discussion. So thank you all for attending tonight's discourse, and do please join us now for some refreshments in the front room. Thank you to our speakers and to our audience.